Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alexandria Canchola, and I'm an assistant professor of graphic design at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi.
Hello, my name is Joshua Duttweiler. I'm also an assistant professor of graphic design at the same institution. We're excited to be here today to share with you our research around the mastheads that unite, analysis of Chicano independent publications. In publication design, mastheads serve as a reader's first indication as to a publication's purpose and credibility. As you can see here, our analysis of these independent publications is based on observations during research visits at university libraries in Texas and California, hubs of the historical Chicano movement. We demonstrate how the design of Chicano independent publication mastheads from the 1960s and 1970s in the United States use the visual language of the Chicano community to engage directly with their audiences.
So part one will provide a bit of contextual history as regards to this movement. So some of the motivation behind the Chicano movement was that this was the first historic attempt to shape a unified ideology serving the interests of the Mexican-American working class and mobilizing them. The unpopular war in Vietnam, combined with labor rights issues, economic inequality, and racial violence, was the motivation for social and political revolution. Independent publications served as the primary news source for local communities, performing roles of watchdog and informer. So these are some important figures to keep in mind. During the movement, there were over 300 publications from 150 communities that were designed and distributed across the United States as an internal organ of communication and motivation. There was a lot of great diversity amongst the covers of the publications. They are typically in three categories: university, cause, and organization. These publications aim to be the voice of Chicano people, often correcting disinformation or lack of information in the traditional white press or mass media portrayals of the Mexican-American experience. Individual papers were connected to the larger movement through the constant use of symbols and logos.
As design technology evolved in the 1960s, there was a plethora of newly accessible and affordable offset printing and scanning technology that brought about a rise of independent publication. With about $200, one could start a newspaper. This meant that formal design education was no longer necessary to typeset and print. Activists, many without formal design training, were empowered to combine text and images into layout. Publications were typically 8-page tabloids designed, written, and edited by these passionate individuals or groups dedicated to exposing and fighting injustice. Chicano publications were sold for mere cents or freely offered to raise awareness and encourage activism within the movement.
So moving on to part two, where we'll take a look at the mastheads. Many of the publications from the period were influenced by the design and visual iconography of the United Farm Workers Union and looked to showcase affiliation with the cause. Logos were employed to provide visual consistency and political unity across these widespread publishers. When we're looking at the front of these covers, the masthead identifies the publication and must have enough weight to stand out from a cluttered background. Newspaper mastheads benefit from being distinctive, recognizable, and appropriate for the topic and audience. Like logos, a good masthead is still recognizable when it's partially obscured. So there were a great plethora of visual styles that were utilized during the masthead typography of Chicano publications from the 60s and 70s. We can see sources of influences such as the Aztec-inspired Art Deco, colonial-era Rococo and Victorian styles, elements from Mexican street brush script, informal calligraphy, and woodblock and linocut lettering. The mastheads of Chicano publications play with aesthetic conventions associated with Mexican or indigenous design and reposition such typographic explorations outside the expected standards of professionalism. There's a noticeable break from the clarity of communication to that of visual engagement and connection with La Causa. It would seem the ability to inject the right personality of rebellion into the work was far more critical. So the lack of immediate legibility, however, does not preclude recognition altogether. Instead of abiding by design's rules or philosophies, they often drew inspiration from sources outside of printed media, as we can see here in Canchola. Their masthead incorporated a snail to represent a spiral of self-expansion and was inspired by Oliver Wendell Holmes' poem, The Chambered Nautilus. The swagger and flair of its design make for a more memorable identity. There is a bold dialogue between the merging of word and image.
As mentioned, the papers were collaborative and creative. In an interview with Juan Espinosa, editor of La Cucaracha, he said, "Something about our existence drew artists. We always had artists coming around, volunteering to do work with us, and we established a lifelong trade. The willingness to engage with and support artists regularly encourage dramatic visual changes in line with the evolving creative teams behind these publications. The publications also connected to the Chicano identity through the use of their language. Most of the mastheads are in Spanish, even though the majority of the publications were either written in English or bilingual. As scholar Chon Noriega has observed, for Chicano artists, playing with the words involves two languages, Spanish and English, as well as the hybrid spaces between them, Kalo, Spanglish, code switching, and interlingual pung. Not all of the papers during this era rebelled, however, against conventional newspaper design. In fact, those that didn't often saw higher readership. So, for example, El Macriado, which had the largest circulation of about 15,000 subscribers at its height, appealed to a wide range of audiences seeking participation with political allies to impact legislation. With only one rebrand, El Macriado's masthead changed little over the course of its 12-year run. El Macriado, the official newspaper of the United Farm Workers, used an upside-down Aztec pyramid as their logo. The UFW's recognizable branding was visually sparse and easily to replicate, becoming an unofficial emblem of the movement and the victorious symbol of the union's successful boycott and legislature's efforts. Other newspapers notably placed the logo on their masthead to demonstrate their loyalty and unity to the cause. In contrast, other publications such as El Cujamil struggled to settle on a visual identity. Transformations show a big evolution over time. It was the El Cujamil's masthead was in constant flux, with elements of the masthead changing almost every year. Loud, bold, and decorative lettering shifted to simplified typographic forms that look polished but lack the personality of the initial brand.
Based on our research, the mastheads use typography, icons, and organization symbols to attract readers in service to the publication's goals of raising awareness on local issues such as labor inequality and racial violence. The efforts made by these publications not only mobilized their audience to fight for social justice, but utilized visual means as a way of uniting their readers towards the cause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.